Die, monster! You don't belong in this world!
Okay, let's do this one more time. This is Dracula, a man who has turned to dark sorcery and forbidden arts, gaining the power to summon and control countless demons from his castle, sometimes known as Castlevania. Known as the Prince of Darkness, he's plagued Transylvania for centuries, appearing once every 100 years after some group of humans inevitably decides it's a good idea to bring him back. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Luckily, there are good men and women, a legendary bloodline of vampire hunters known as the Belmonts, who rise generation after generation to crack their holy vampire killer whip across Dracula's head and send him back to the grave for another century. In the midst of this endless war stands Dracula's son, Alucard, who once fought alongside Trevor Belmont in 1476 to defeat his own father. But after this, guilt consumes him and he seals away his cursed blood in an eternal sleep. Yet, Dracula always returns. Christopher Belmont defeats him in the 16th century, Simon Belmont in the 17th, and Richter Belmont in 1792. But the cycle breaks when an evil priest named Shaft cheats death. Though Richter slays him, Shaft's ghost returns to possess the young hunter and revive Dracula, forcing Alucard to awaken and confront his father once again. Dracula holds anger in his heart, scorning the evil of humanity and curses them for burning his wife, Lisa, at the stake. But Alucard still sees the good in them and carries on his mother's wish to not hold hatred for humans. He knows he must destroy his own father, which leads to a swift end to their reunion.
Damn!
With the deed done, Alucard returns to his slumber, and peace finally returns. For a time. But the legacy doesn't end there. The vampire killer passes to the Morris family, descendants of the Belmont lion, and in the late 19th century, Quincy Morris gives his life to stop Dracula once more. And years later, his son, John Morris, wields the whip to battle the Count's followers across Europe. These are the events of the mainline games we've covered so far, with Symphony of the Night being a genre-defining shift for the Castlevania series. Its impact brought a new captain to the head of the table, Koji Igarashi. But before that, there were a couple of growing pains. So now we cover the early 2000s era of Castlevania, and how the series drastically changed after Castlevania Symphony of the Night. And I've noticed some people get very spicy when you use the word Metroidvania. It's almost like a slur to some people. And I'm not taking away from the fact that Metroid was one of the pioneers of this genre, but Castlevania does do different things and implements more RPG elements versus what Metroid did. So even though Metroid was an influence to Castlevania, Metroidvania is now the term, the genre. It's not going away. I'll continue using it.
You don't belong in this world.
You need to leave!
Welcome to Mentoktober. Despite the gradual success of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, the games that followed shortly after made attempts to bring the series fully into the 3D realm. Castlevania and Castlevania Legacy of Darkness, released for the Nintendo 64, was Konami's big push into something new. But the reception for these games was pretty mixed, and in the grand scheme of the series, they turned out to be somewhat forgettable. But going into the new millennium, Konami wanted to try their hand again at a proper 3D Castlevania title. So with Konami being big fans of chasing new tech, why not try out Sega's cutting-edge console, the Sega Dreamcast? The Dreamcast is still one of my favorite consoles of all time, by the way. You can still see I have mine back there.
Okay.
That's my original Dreamcast over there. I could do a whole video about this console. Skies of Arcadia, I'm looking at you. Castlevania Resurrection. I wouldn't blame you if you've never heard of this title because it was cancelled. Majority of the development is estimated to have taken place sometime in 1999 for a 2000 release date. Allegedly, the story would have been set in the year 1666, starring Sonia Belmont and a new Belmont named Victor. Seeing as Sonia was originally meant to be the first Belmont to go toe-to-toe with Dracula in Castlevania Legends, it looked like this game wouldn't have cared much for established timelines. But it seems there would have been some time travel shenanigans at play here, with Sonia coming from the past and Victor hailing from the future. So Dracula's forces would have tried to resurrect him again, led by a vampire countess who wants revenge against the Belmonts for sealing him away in the first place. Victor was characterized as a wandering gambler who chose not to accept his legacy as a Belmont, running away from home at an early age before returning to fulfill his destiny. Since Castlevania 64 sold decently in the United States, Konami thought, why not do another 3D title with focus on that audience? headed up by an American team based in San Francisco, though the game fell to turmoil due to disagreements between the Japanese and American teams. Resurrection's environment artist Jason Lee Elliott has said, quote, "Castlevania Resurrection was a game doomed from the start. When Konami first moved to San Francisco, this was one of the first projects started at the studio. Most of the team had only ever worked on sports games, so they had no idea how to make a 3D action platformer. The art team wasn't very cohesive and couldn't agree on a direction. The game had been in development for almost 2 years and had little to show. I'd been at the office almost every day for almost 3 years at this point, and was suffering from severe burnout, which didn't help. After only a few months on this team, I decided I had to quit. A few months after leaving, the game was cancelled and the entire studio was closed down." So by March 2000, Castlevania Resurrection was officially cancelled due to the mess during development, Sega on the verge of discontinuing their Dreamcast console, and Konami ready to move on to the upcoming PlayStation 2. And shortly after its cancellation, the beta copy of the game went missing. But like a vampire in the night, over 20 years after its death, Castlevania Resurrection resurfaced in 2021. The footage you're seeing here is a look at a working demo of the game, uploaded by Comey Laurent, the owner of Sega Dreamcast Info Games Preservation, who managed to acquire it. This demo was dated November 5th, 1999, and the player can take control of Sonia, armed with the vampire killer, with movement and combat very much resembling Castlevania 64. In the demo, you play through 5 areas, including a courtyard, chapel, a stairs area, the main hall, and a corridor, with the demo ending after this chase from a Hydra boss. Something about this is very unsettling to me, by the way. Reminds me of that cut boss from Sonic Adventure and Sky Chase. That unfinished feeling just makes it feel like it's not supposed to be here. Just looking at this gives me butterflies in my stomach. I can't explain it. But I wanted to make sure I covered this game before moving on, because there's a lot of interesting concept art, magazine articles, and other goodies archived by fans out there, and this deserves more eyes. I'll also include a link to the Dreamcast Info Games Preservation site in the description below if you want to read a little bit more about it. Ton of interesting facts in there. So Castlevania wouldn't get another title until 2001 with Castlevania Circle of the Moon, released for the Game Boy Advance. This was a big move for the series, as it would be a fully playable handheld Metroidvania title in the style of Symphony of the Night. Taking place in 1830 Europe, the story stars a new protagonist, Nathan Graves, son of vampire hunters who perished in a fight with Dracula 10 years prior. Their colleague and fellow vampire hunter Morris Baldwin trains Nathan and his son Hugh to prepare for the day when Dracula reawakens. But as always, there's someone around to try and bring it back. This time it's Camilla, who revives Dracula in some Austrian castle. And it feels like it's getting pretty easy to revive him at this point. Like, what is this? Remember when you had to wait 100 years and perform an elaborate blood sacrifice? No more, you can revive him with the snap of a finger. So Nathan, Morris, and Hugh spring into action and interrupt Camilla when she attempts to replenish Dracula's power. But he quickly sends Nathan and Hugh falling deeper into the castle, and the game kicks off. If the characters of this game feel a bit off and nothing seems to fit into previous Castlevania lore, that's because Circle of the Moon was developed by Konami's team in Kobe, the same squad that worked on Castlevania 64, separate from Konami's Tokyo team who developed Symphony of the Night. There's no light shed on who the Graves family is and if they have any ties to the Belmonts. Even Nathan's whip is called the Hunter Whip rather than the Vampire Killer, and it would eventually be removed from the series canon. Despite that, it was a big step for Konami and their second attempt at the Metroidvania formula, managing to fit a massive map you can backtrack around on the go. Returning is the RPG-style level-up system to improve Nathan's stats as you explore the castle, and collect equipment to tune to your playstyle. This time, Circle of the Moon centered its gameplay around the duel setup system. You'd collect several cards dropped by enemies while roaming the castle, and you're able to augment and combine them for various effects, like increasing Nathan's stats, changing the properties of Nathan's whip, or abilities similar to Rondo of Blood's item crashes. So while the game does look a bit primitive compared to Symphony of the Night and future titles, it plays very smoothly, and I would even say some of the major bosses in this game still look great. So the story continues with Nathan powering his way through the castle, having frequent run-ins with Hugh, who seems to be getting more prickly as the game progresses. But the plan is for Camilla and Dracula to sacrifice Morris when the moon is full to fully awaken Dracula's powers. This leads up to the showdown with Camilla, who tells Nathan she revived Dracula because the world is already hellish. filled with humans who are self-centered and already embrace darkness, so why not revel in that by reviving a demon to participate? She also reveals that she and Dracula have been manipulating Hugh before their fight begins, transforming into a form that resembles her appearance in Rondo of Blood. But Nathan annihilates her and moves on to find Dracula. Unfortunately, Hugh is fully possessed by Dracula and insists on stopping Nathan. But after going blow for blow, Nathan manages to save Hugh, who apologizes and leaves the rest up to him. And our boy Nathan interrupts the sacrifice just in time and faces off against Dracula. But in typical Castlevania fashion, there's a final demonic form, complete with an eyeball emerging from his ab sphincter area. This is gross. But Nathan triumphs over Dracula, who for the 15th time says as long as there's darkness in the world, he will be revived. And the castle crumbles as Nathan, Morris, and Hugh safely watch at the cliffside. Circle of the Moon is one of those Castlevania games that I think gets lost in discussion in the midst of more popular ones, but at the time sold over 500,000 copies and got very positive reviews from publications. And I think this is mainly due to the wonder of being able to pull off a Symphony of the Night style Castlevania game on the Game Boy Advance. This would be the final game in the series developed by the Konami team in Kobe, as they would be dissolved a year later in 2002. This is when Koji Igarashi would fully take leadership over the series, and he seems very critical of Circle of the Moon despite not being involved with it, saying that the dual setup system didn't match the world Castlevania established, despite him thinking it was a good system. And he'd later officially remove it from the timeline, saying that the development team intended it to be a standalone title. A similar thing he said regarding Castlevania 64, so I wonder what the true relationship is between Iga and the Konami team in Kobe. Either way, the Game Boy Advance would get another Castlevania title just a year later, Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance. To add some more fuel to the confusing Japanese title fire, they dropped the Akumajo Dracula name and called this one Castlevania Concerto of Midnight Sun. This has to be an inside joke over there or something, it has to be. This would be the first game in the series since Symphony of the Night to have involvement from Koji Igarashi, who I'll call Iga from now on, who joined as the producer. To which of course he brought back artist Ayami Kojima and her distinct art style, as well as Michiru Yamane returning to compose. This was one of two Castlevania titles that Iga was producing for the Game Boy Advance, with the intent to create a game fully similar to Symphony of the Night due to its critical acclaim. Harmony of Dissonance takes place in 1748, putting us back in Transylvania 50 years after Simon Belmont defeated Dracula in Simon's Quest. Simon is now a hero, resulting in the people rallying around him and forming a village with the Belmonts at the center. So Harmony of Dissonance stars Just Belmont, grandson of Simon, who's now the wielder of the vampire killer. And he has this best friend named Maxim, who disappears on a training expedition for 2 whole years before coming back wounded, telling Juice their childhood friend Liddy has been kidnapped. To top it off, Maxim doesn't remember what happened during his 2-year disappearance. So yeah, this situation is sus, but you'd never guess where Maxim tells Juiced where he thinks Liddy is being held. Yeah, you probably guessed it. Dracula's castle. So Juiced humors this and enters the castle and is immediately assaulted by this iron giant, which kicks off Harmony of Dissonance. And as always, Death is there to greet the new guest. He confirms to Juice that he is indeed in Dracula's castle, but the power within it is not that of Dracula, but another. But now you're open to explore the castle, and right out of the gate, Juice controls a bit sluggish than, say, Alucard in Symphony of the Night. He is of course equipped with his whip, and can find sub-weapons around the castle, including this new one called Sacred Fist, where he decides to just throw hands. Heart points are what fuel your sub-weapons as usual, but this time there's another gauge that Juice has. Mana. So yes, Juice can cast magic. It's that Belnada's blood in him, he's got that dog in him. As you explore, you can find spellbooks around the castle that allow him to use magic, but you can only equip one spellbook at a time. And Juice will fuse the element of that spellbook with his sub-weapon, allowing for 6 different types of magic per spellbook. Still, as I replayed this game, I felt like Juice had a weight attached to his leg or something. It was apparent when walking and platforming, but of course you can always spam the dash button to get your speedrun going. And you'll find that this title is a little less open at the beginning compared to Symphony of the Night, with doors to other areas being locked, so it'll feel a little bit linear at first. But as the game goes on, there's another mirror castle that will be available to explore, and while they're more or less the same castle, there are color differences as well as new enemies as you explore each. They're referred to as Castle A and B, but what you do in one will eventually affect the other. Iga was joined this time by Takashi Takeda, who directed Harmony of Dissonance, a huge Castlevania fanatic who wanted to pour his heart and soul into creating his own game. He and Iga conducted an interview that went into the official guidebook, explaining why they landed on a mirror castle. He first decided to make this a map exploration style Castlevania game, as opposed to the older stage action games. Symphony of the Night's inverted castle was a truly excellent idea, but it wasn't the kind of thing you could present to players twice. So we needed to come up with something that could rival that. What came out was the idea of traversing a castle with two sides, a front and back, or front and reverse, if you will. But there's some really cool looking bosses in this game. I still adore sprite work done right, and that's apparent with enemies like the Minotaur, Legion who returns from Symphony of the Night, and Pazuzu. And I'd be remiss not to mention that cool little interior design feature they added to this game. Juice can actually go around and collect furniture in the castle to decorate this empty room that he finds. I tried to look around for interviews or something to find out who came up with this idea, but I couldn't find anything. But this is just cool.
悪魔城じゃないですか、ドラキュラの城ですよね、でドラキュラの息子アルカードですよね、アルカードの部屋があるよねっていう話になっていてそうやけるとその部屋がだんだん増築されていくっていうので、あと置いてあるアイテムを勝手に持って行って自分の部屋に置くと、これは俺の部屋に合うなとかって言って。
So there you go. Originally supposed to be in Symphony of the Night, they ended up putting it in Harmony of Dissonance. Anyway, the game continues with Maxim continuing to act weird, and I'm sure you know where this is going by now. But as his memory starts to return, he tells Juice that he went on this adventure to find Dracula's remains, to revive and destroy them like Simon once did, to prove himself to the village. But at some point in that journey, he lost his memory. Death will later reveal that the castle is orienting itself into two layers to accommodate the two living spirits within Maxim's body. So our suspicions are correct. Maxim is not here in good faith, and turns out he was the one who kidnapped Liddy in the first place. Sometime during his adventure, he made way for an evil spirit created from Dracula's remains, fueled by his jealousy of Juice. So throughout, he'll be split between these two spirits, sometimes helping, sometimes being weird. So Juice must find Dracula's remains and do the deed himself to end this curse on Maxim. But Death eventually gets his hands on Liddy, hoping to use her blood to combine the two castles. Juice eventually destroys Death, but Liddy is now with a fully possessed Maxim, so it's time for Juice to take on his own friend. Similarly to Simon's quest, there are three possible endings here. If you fight Maxim in Castle B, he'd already have bitten Liddy, and after their fight, both Maxim and Liddy are killed. The castle crumbles as Juice beats himself up over it outside the castle. If you fight Maxim in Castle A, Liddy will live while Maxim fights against his possession, which gives Juice the opportunity to kill him off. And Juice and Liddy stand outside the castle to mourn their friend. The way to get the true ending is to fight Maxim in Castle B while both Juice Bracelet and Maxim's bracelets are equipped, which will remind Maxim of their friendship, and he fully resists the possession, which makes Dracula fully appear. An incomplete abomination that Juice can now strike down. Only then can Juice leave with both of his friends alive. And in this ending, they live happily ever after. If these conditions for the ending felt a bit specific, Iga has acknowledged that this final ending would be difficult to find. You learn about the reverse castle pretty early, and we thought once you realized that, it would be cool to have there be one more layer. And the mechanism for that was Juice's bracelet and Maxim's bracelet. The backstory is that they were given to them by Liddy, but you do remember how in the very beginning you're equipped with Juice's bracelet? The interview continues with them saying in hindsight it wasn't the easiest ending to figure out how to get, but the importance of the bracelets are littered throughout the game. Even the game over screen shows a bloodied bracelet. By the way, if you were collecting all that furniture for that room, Juice will actually rizz up Liddy at the end, and they have this little moment here. Probably not worth your time, but shout out to my completionists out there. They also included a boss rush mode that you unlock once you beat the game the first time. So if you want to take on all the bosses in the game in a row, you can do that. But also, Simon is a playable character in Boss Rush. Get the true ending of the game and you'll also unlock Maxim mode, where you get to explore the castle as Maxim, complete with his own weapons and special abilities. Harmony of Dissonance is like the definitive sequel to Simon's quest, and it's nice to see them start to incorporate the lore a little bit more within this game, complete with references to Simon himself and Juiced having the ability to wield Belnades style magic. And though it moved about 126,000 copies in the US, the Japanese sales weren't so great, so it wasn't the best start for Iga jumping in. Though it was reviewed positively on release, Harmony of Dissonance has become the black sheep of the Game Boy Advance era. But even at that time, reviewers were very critical of the music. Up to this point, almost every Castlevania had a legendary soundtrack. but Harmony of Dissonance leans more into the dissonance part of the title. Michiru Yamane was joined by Soshiro Hokai, who was the main composer for the title, and word of the criticism toward his soundtrack got back to him. He acknowledged this in the CD liner notes for the game's soundtrack, saying, "First of all, I feel I should apologize to those who are disappointed. As you know, the songs in Harmony were primarily composed with the Game Boy's PSG sound chip. In order to create a Symphony of the Night level game on a more limited handheld platform, we had to impose some limitations on the music and opted for a PSG sound. Owing to certain aspects of the GBA hardware, it's difficult to modulate the volume of PSG sounds. Nevertheless, I stubbornly persisted in trying to create rich, dynamic compositions. And in terms of the songs themselves, I did my best to return to that old progressive style of video game music." But at the same time, Iga was overseeing the development of another Castlevania title for the Game Boy Advance that would release the following year. Castlevania Aria of Sorrow, released to the world in May 2003. So while Harmony of Dissonance went back to the past, Aria of Sorrow takes us to the future to the year 2035. And the game stars Soma Cruz, a student in Japan living close to the Hakuba shrine where his childhood friend Mina Hakuba lives. And as they're watching a solar eclipse at the shrine, they're quickly pulled into it, landing in a mysterious castle where they meet government agent Genya Arikado, who tells them flat out that they're in Dracula's castle inside the moon. What a setup. But immediately, monsters attack, and while Soma defends himself, he suddenly awakens what is known as the power of dominance, an ability that has him absorb the soul of the monster, which has Arikado explain to get home, he needs to find the master's chamber. And you're sent on your way. Right out of the gate, Aria of Sorrow has a much keener sense of that Symphony of the Night feel. Soma moves faster, his walking animations less awkward, even the menus feel a lot cleaner and user-friendly compared to Harmony of Dissonance. So while Juice gameplay could be compared more to someone like Richter, Soma is more like Alucard, with him being able to equip different types of weapons like swords, axes, and because it's 2035, we got guns in this bitch. Senya Cruz here can get the strap. But the biggest change to Aria of Sorrow is the tactical soul system, incorporating Soma's power of dominance, and there's similarities to Circle of the Moon's card system. As you defeat monsters throughout the game, Soma has a chance of absorbing their soul, which allows him to equip them to gain different types of abilities. There are Bullet, Guardian, and Enchanted souls, signified by the colors red, blue, and yellow respectively, and you can equip one of each. Bullet souls are pretty much sub-weapons, while Guardian souls allows Soma to activate an effect for a continuous amount of time as long as he has MP. Enchanted souls are more passive, which may include stat increases or immunities to poison, for example. And the last type are ability souls, which are similar to relics from previous games, which give Soma additional movement abilities that allow him to better traverse the castle, like the double jump or slide. And because this is the Game Boy Advance, you could even trade souls with other players via a link cable, if you were lucky to have a link cable, and a friend that played this game too.
You good, bro?
And the story here changes things up. This time around, there are a lot more characters running around the castle, which keeps things fresh. Like Graham Jones, a missionary who gives some background on the castle itself, and explains that in 1999, Nostradamus' apocalyptic prophecy came true, and Dracula was revived to destroy the world, but was killed permanently by vampire hunters. Like killed this time, no longer coming back. Poor guy got off-screened after all this time. We learned they accomplished this by sealing the castle within the moon during the darkness of the eclipse, forever ending the cycle once and for all. But that also explains why they're in the castle in the moon right now. But the prophecy also says in 2035 AD, Dracula's power will live on, passed down to his reincarnation. There's also a witch named Yoko Belnades. Yes, the Belnades clan still exists, and she's on a mission for the Catholic Church, on a search for the inheritor of Dracula's power, her prime suspect being Graham. Soma will also run into a man with amnesia who goes by the name of Jay, involved in an accident way back in 1999. But he was drawn to the castle by the prophecy and hoped it would jog his memory by being there. But he also questions Soma's abilities, wondering when he received them. But as Soma explores the castle, he'll run into these characters more, and Graham here seems to catch the Maxim syndrome with him racing to get to the throne while flipping out on Soma. So as you can already tell, the plot here is pretty different from a traditional Castlevania title. And this was done intentionally by Iga and the team. He said in an interview, "It would be well enough if we just ignored any story considerations and simply had players fight Dracula each game. But instead, there's this canon lore that Dracula gets revived once every 100 years. That being the case, the only option for us was to try and take things in a new direction. And I really want the Castlevania series to keep going. That's how we got to the idea of Count Dracula appearing in the future. And Soma's an interesting character because he has no blood ties to characters from any previous games, not the Morris family, Belmonts, or anything like that. He's just Soma Cruz. But where did he get that name? I wanted a name that would translate well to foreign players. As for Cruz, well, at that time, Penelope Cruz had just visited Japan. It also has some associations with Cross that I liked. Soma is taken from the name of the Indian ritual drink Soma, and actually director Murakami's son is named Soma. So yeah, we can thank Penelope Cruz for this character. Alright, back to the story. Yoko tells Soma that they have to beat Graham to the master's room because he can't be trusted, only for him to later stab her and then teleport off. Luckily, she lives while Arikado tends to her wounds. But Soma will also encounter Jay again, who tells him that his powers triggered his memories. This is Julius Belmont.
Oh shit!
The one who permanently destroyed Dracula in 1999. But with his memories back and Dracula's dark powers in the air, he has to continue his mission, though he says it's difficult to believe that Graham is actually Dracula. But once Soma finally confronts Graham in the castle keep, they fight each other, leading to Graham transforming into this demon. But Soma takes him down and absorbs all of his power. This is when the game presents its twist. Soma was the reincarnation of Dracula all along.
No way!
Revealed by Arikado, who says it's only a matter of time before Dracula's evil spirit influences him. How do you know so much about this? But this evil has a source. The stream of chaos existing within the castle itself. A place only Dracula can access. The chief designer of Aria of Sorrow, Hiroto Yamaguchi, said, quote, "We always knew that the final boss for Aria would be chaos itself. And we were inspired by that line of dialogue Alucard says from Symphony of the Night.
This castle is a creature of chaos. It may take many incarnations.
To make a stage that showed players the incipient form of the castle itself. But Soma is now Dracula, so he chooses to destroy that chaos himself to end this cycle. But Julius stands in his way with his sworn mission to eradicate Dracula. But during their fight, Julius senses that Soma is still his own person, not succumbing to the influence of Dracula, and lets him defeat him. Yeah, Julius lets Soma win. So with his mission set, Soma heads to the chaotic realm and locates that source of chaos, having to fight it to end the cycle of evil once and for all. And through his own free will and power, Soma finally destroys it and puts an end to this centuries-long nightmare. All the friends he met along the way trust Soma, allowing him to embrace being his own person, and the game ends with him and Mina overlooking the moon together. Aria of Sorrow is probably the best Game Boy Advance game of the bunch. After 5 games following it, Symphony of the Night finally had a proper successor, and this did feel like the game to break the mold. Avoiding that formula of exploring the castle, finding out someone's trying to revive Dracula, and then fighting Dracula at the end. This time they turned that plot on its head by making the main character the reincarnation of Dracula. This time ridding the world of that evil, just by being a good person. And while this game sold more than Harmony of Dissonance in the United States, moving about 158,000 copies, this was once again a poor showing for Castlevania in Japan, with 27,000 sales in the first month. So up to this point in the video, I've gone through so many Castlevania games and I'm actually surprised to see that they were a lot less successful in the early days than I thought they were. Many of these games didn't even break 1 million copies sold within their initial run. Maybe that's changed now because a lot of people have caught up to the series over time, but it says a lot about the impact of Castlevania because even with the smaller sales numbers, it has such a lasting effect on the actual industry. It's great. But before I move on, I need a minute to talk about Julius motherfucking Belmont. This is the Belmont of Belmonts. After centuries of playing this game with Dracula, this man said, nah, we're ending this shit, and comes up with a full plan to kill him permanently. Off screen. Julius is so powerful that he doesn't even want us to control him as a playable character. There's the unlockable Julius mode at the end of this game, but I'm not counting that. I need a full game with him. There's a time where Castlevania fans were screaming for a game to cover the events of 1999, where this guy rolled up to Dracula's castle and murdered him for good, and sealed away his castle into the moon. How? Even when Soma has his full Dracula powers and the two briefly fight, Soma notices that Julius is going easy on him. We were denied a full game with Julius as the protagonist, and Konami, if you're looking to jump back in the series, just cover these events before you move on. The 90s are in right now, so a 1999 Castlevania would be dope. Have Julius stroll into the castle with a Walkman or something blasting heavy metal or some corny hip-hop remix of Vampire Killer. I'll direct it, Konami, don't worry. So in 2003, Ego would release a game that would be a big shift for the series, both because of plotline and gameplay, but also because it went back to console. Castlevania Lament of Innocence, or simply known as Castlevania in Japan, released for the PlayStation 2 in 2003. I'll be honest, I never got around to playing this game before this video. And I don't think I really knew about Lament of Innocence before maybe like 6 years after. That's how badly I fell off the Castlevania train, but I imagine I'm not alone on that. I have a theory. Konami sucked at marketing these games. Damn. If you guys have watched my channel before, normally I put a little intermission between segments with that little kid watching TV with some old commercial on for the game I'm about to talk about. Some people hate those little intermissions, but I don't care, I like them, so they're staying. But that comes back to my point that there are like barely any Castlevania commercials. Like none of the games I've spoken about in this video have one for US, Europe, or Japan. So did Konami assume word of mouth was the way to go? If so, the gaming magazines were doing some heavy lifting. Maybe there were internet ads around at that time, but still. So I'm curious in the comments if anybody knew about Lament of Innocence before or around the time it came out.
1,000 years ago, a family's destiny was born. Not in a cradle, but in a coffin.
With Aria of Sorrow exploring the end of Dracula in 2035 AD, Lament of Innocence goes all the way back, before the days of Dracula. It's the 11th century, and in Europe, monarchies are beginning to weaken, with local feudal lords growing in power. They're knights now protecting the peace in their domains, fighting heretics and heathens in God's name. There's one extraordinary company of knights living in this time, led by two insanely powerful men. Leon Belmont, a fearless warrior whose ability in combat is unmatched, and Matthias Kronkvist, an expert tactician who stands out in an already largely illiterate society. But these two are good friends, which leads them to be an unstoppable pair. But after a military campaign, Matthias's wife Elisabetha suddenly perishes, and in his grief he becomes bedridden. So a year goes by and Leon is still holding down the Knights Company, but all of this changes when an army of monsters attack his domain. With the Crusaders raging and the church's efforts solely focused on that front, they have no men to spare for like actual demons at home. And Leon is forbidden to fight against these demons. So yeah, it's implied that vampires and demons are just kind of like a normalized thing. But Matthias emerges from his bed and tells Leon that the source of the monsters is a vampire who lives in a castle surrounded by forests called Eternal Night. And to make matters worse, Leon's betrothed, Sarah, has been kidnapped and brought to that same castle. With his family in danger, Leon renounces his title as a knight and enters the forest to storm this castle, beginning the legacy of the Belmont clan. I hinted at this last video, but this would be Iga's stab at creating an origin story. With Castlevania Legends taking place in 1450, that game was supposed to be the origin story for the Belmont's feud with Dracula, but poor Sonia was removed from the timeline. Iga has said, quote, "I intentionally redacted it from the timeline so that it doesn't conflict with the timing used in other titles," end quote. So with Lament of Innocence taking place in 1094 AD, Sonia's story seems to conflict more with Castlevania 3, which would have occurred 26 years later, and Iga seemed to want to stick to the rule that Dracula can only be revived every 100 years. Still, justice for Sonia Belmont. Lament of Innocence begins with Leon running through the forest like a crazy person before he crosses the threshold into eternal darkness. But he's quickly stopped by alchemist Rinaldo Gandolfi. Gandolfi? He invites Leon into his cottage to brief him on the castle, which we find out belongs to Walter Bernhard, a ruthless vampire who is notorious for playing sick games with people who try to hunt him down. And Rinaldo lives on Walter's property because of unfinished business he refuses to disclose with Leon. And apparently Leon showed up here completely unarmed and planned to punch his way through the castle because his normal weapons belong to the company he recently left. So honorable he couldn't even just take a sword. So Rinaldo gives him the Whip of Alchemy to defend himself, a whip forged from alchemy, a practice that Rinaldo reveals Leon's close friend Matthias is an expert in, which is news to Leon. But right out of the gate, this cutscene with Rinaldo felt like the game was trying to mask the spoon feeding it's giving you.
Please follow me to my cottage. I want to talk to you. Wait here a moment. There's something I want to give you. His family has a book of secret arts, originally handed down orally. Don't move now. The gauntlet is enchanted now. Wait a minute. I forgot to tell you something. The door— I get it!
And Leon is completely clueless to what Rinaldo is telling him while he goes on and on with exposition to try and narratively set the stage for the rest of the game. Up to this point, Castlevania games expertly get to the point. Every game before Lament of Innocence throws you right into the action and builds on the story later. So it's interesting to me that this intro is such a slow burn, and Leon, this experienced, unstoppable knight, seems so naive. And I've been through games with longer setup. As a huge fan of RPGs, I'm cool with an intro that takes time, but for Castlevania, this felt pretty out of character. Anyway, Leon finally enters the castle, and the premise is to destroy 5 main monsters in 5 different areas of the castle to gain access to Walter. And venturing in, I was actually pretty excited to see how they transitioned into a proper 3D Castlevania outside of Castlevania 64. Leon's main arsenal is similar to Belmont's from previous games, with his brand new whip as the main weapon, using square for basic combos and triangle for stronger whip attacks that can be implemented for more diverse combos. Later in the game, you'll be able to take on elemental bosses that give special elemental versions of the whip once defeated. In addition, there are familiar and new sub-weapons that you can use to cover all your bases, once again fueled by heart points. As always, I loved the holy water, especially with this 3D combat because it gave me room to breathe when monsters were getting the best of me. And later in the game, you'll be able to combine your sub-weapons with special orbs to use special attacks. Leon also has this gauntlet that was enchanted by Ronaldo at the beginning of the game, which allows him to guard certain attacks that will fill up his MP gauge, and he can activate relics to get stronger attacks or change the property of those attacks. It's an interesting system that gives you an incentive to guard more rather than dodge, but this took me some getting used to. And with every Castlevania game, you'll have to platform, which was much more frustrating to me than anything else. At the start of the game, Leon can double jump and use his whip to access unreachable areas, but my main gripe is with this camera angle. It's a fixed camera angle, and as far as I could tell, you couldn't freely move the camera, so my depth perception was off from the start. But also the camera is so zoomed in that it's hard to get a sense of where you're going sometimes, and it's very easy to miss platforms that are like directly above you. And there's nothing wrong with a fixed camera. If you look back at games like Resident Evil, which did it for effect, it made areas more suspenseful and claustrophobic, which fit the setting. Here, it's just disorienting and makes the halls of the castle start to just blend together. Despite this, I was actually enjoying the combat system because you start to unlock new skills as you defeat more enemies. But getting lost in these halls and having to constantly look at my map to find my way around these samey looking environments made it pretty tedious. I don't know if it's difficult to translate a series like Castlevania from 2D to 3D, but what the Metroidvania titles did right was manage to make each area feel diverse and simple to remember. Even without a map, you can generally pick up on the layout of the castle, which makes backtracking feel less tedious, and enemies feel like simple obstacles in your way that you can quickly dispatch if you learn their attack patterns. Even if assets are reused, each room felt a little bit different from the last. But in Lament of Innocence, I have to ask, what is the difference between this hallway and this one? This room and that one? And to make this worse, doors will lock and force you to defeat all enemies in the room to move forward. So if you get lost, you'll find yourself doing this in rooms you've already cleared. To top it off, in the first area, there are these doors that have multiple locks on them, which you'll have to go around the area and find switches to push down to completely unlock. Miss any and you're backtracking through the halls again. I don't know, to me this feels counterintuitive to what previous games established. And despite my criticisms, I don't think Lament of Innocence is a bad game, but this came out in 2003, and I can point to other games that did this formula right by that time, like Onimusha and Devil May Cry, ironically both Capcom games that were originally intended to be Resident Evil titles. But both of these games were for the PlayStation 2 and preceded Lament of Innocence by 2 years. Don't get me wrong, each area of the castle has its own gimmicks and diversified platforming sections, but majority of the time, you'll be in hallways and rooms filled with groups of monsters to take down to move on. But we get back to the story, with Leon starting to raid the castle and taking on bosses like the undead parasite, which is like, all of this is gross. But eventually he'll encounter a vampire named
Armstair.
Is that the right pronunciation?
That's right, lowly human.
So Ahim has a little grudge with Walter, and he's ready to take it out on Leon, leading to a major boss fight. But once he's defeated, he reveals that the source of the never-ending darkness in this forest is caused by a stone made from alchemy called the Ebony Stone. And he hints of the existence of a Crimson Stone as well, before vaporizing.
Good.
So Leon asks Ronaldo about this, and he's all like,
What about them?
yeah, get used to this. Ronaldo is like this for 70% of this game. But he does tell Leon that the Ebony and Crimson Stones were products of alchemy, much like the fabled Philosopher's Stone, a powerful stone that provides eternal youth. But the two discuss the missing Crimson Stone, a stone that Ronaldo says converts the souls of vampires into power for its holder. So after returning to the castle, Leon will also run into a familiar face, Medusa, much like her original bodiless form from the original Castlevania. But she easily crumbles to Leon's whip. and she mentions how strong it's gotten and asks Leon if it's reached its final form, to which he has no idea what she's talking about. So our naive little Leon will go back to Ronaldo and ask him about that, who says,
Oh, that.
I actually really like how awkward and casual their conversations are. I know I'm dunking on Leon a bit, but he's meant to be characterized as a very honest and chivalrous knight. But Leon presses further on how to unlock its true power.
It's better for you not to think about that. It's impossible by any normal means. But do not think about it. There are other things you must take care of right now.
Damn, chill, bro. In the ghostly theater, Leon will run into his betrothed Sarah, who's acting a little bit strange. Never mind, it's just the succubus.
Careless.
Oh, this will be lovely.
This is the type of boss you didn't want to fight when your mom walked into the room, I'm sure. But when defeated, the succubus will tell Leon something happened to Ronaldo's daughter, which leads him to, of course, go back to ask him about it.
Returned home from picking herbs necessary for the secret arts. And what greeted me was a sea of steaming blood. And at the center of it were the bodies of my wife and son. I could not believe my eyes. My daughter was there, laughing, blood dripping from her mouth.
She'd become a vampire because of Walter. So in response, Ronaldo would make the Whip of Alchemy.
Then I searched for her.
I see.
Props to this voice actor, man. He's so intense. So yes, Ronaldo is looking to take down Walter because he was forced to kill his own daughter. But after heading back to the castle, Leon will meet Walter for the first time, with Sarah by his side, stuck in some type of daze. But Leon's whip doesn't work on Walter. And despite this, Walter will return Sarah and tells Leon he'll wait for him in the throne room. Unfortunately, Leon is too late, and Sarah is on her way to transforming into a vampire. And the only thing that can be done now is to kill Walter. But because the whip doesn't work on him, there's only one way to make it strong enough. A tainted soul is a sacrifice, one that trusts the owner of the whip. This is very specific, but yes, Sarah is already doomed and tells Leon she has no more time left. And if her soul could be the one to save others, she won't be dying in vain. Leon is hesitant, but in the end he does as she asks and enters a blood covenant with her soul.
His blood accepts your hatred.
Pure, spotless blood of God.
And by striking her down, we finally see the sacrifice that had to be made to create the vampire killer. A ritual that was passed down by Matthias's family, and one that would empower the Belmonts with a way to smite evil for generations. Angered, it's now time for Leon to take down Walter. With Sarah's soul giving him power, he fights his way up to the throne room. And Walter is shocked that the whip works on him, but the two duke it out, with Leon fighting in the memory of Sarah and Ronaldo's family. So Leon is now strong enough to defeat Walter, who swears that he's gonna take the power of the Crimson Stone at some point, and says his powers will likely bring him back to life. But he's interrupted by Death, who takes his soul and tells Leon that power will go to the current owner of the stone, who is revealed to be Matthias.
Yeah, boy.
Matthias revealed that he set up everyone, positioning them all like chess pieces so he can absorb Walter's vampiric power. And he tells Leon that he became a vampire as revenge against God, who he blames for mercilessly taking his wife from him. And because of this, he chooses to curse God forevermore. A disappointed Leon chooses not to walk that path, even after what happened to Sarah, and turns his whip against Matthias.
Eternity without her would be nothing but emptiness.
So they go through an awkward little friendship breakup here, and Matthias seeks death on Leon instead, leading to the final boss of the game. Leon defeats him, but he says as long as his master survives, he will always rise from the dead.
I see. Give him this message. You have become a cursed being, and I will never forgive you. This whip and my kinsmen will destroy you someday. From this day on, the Belmont clan will hunt the night!
And the game ends on a somewhat sad note. As Leon walks away from the castle, the credits roll. But we get the final reveal at the end that Matthias goes into hiding in foreign lands, eventually taking on the mantle of King of Vampires, Dracula. This was clearly a very different game in the series, with IGA planning for a 3D title from the start, saying to Electronic Gamer Monthly, quote, We also knew that back when the Konami Kobe studio made it in 3D for Nintendo 64, it didn't go well. It just didn't fit with the classic game system. My team and I knew what had to be done in order to make it properly. And if we were going to make it in 3D, why not do it on the PS2 since it's the best-selling hardware? As I read these interviews, Iga seems to have a bit of an ego. I sense tension between him and the team that was in Kobe as well. I don't know. Just speculation. But he wanted to tell the story to answer the question, what is Dracula? The myth is clearly different within the Castlevania game, so why not explain this while also covering the origins of the Belmont clan and the vampire killer? Matthias is someone who goes mad at the loss of his lover, turning away from God as a whole and humanity by extension. An eternal being that even learns to love again with Lisa and Alucard hundreds of years later, before his love is stripped away from him again by humans, burning her at the stake in the name of the same God. It does give a better sense of how this hatred warps into this monster that Dracula becomes. This is a tad unrelated, but in that same interview, Iga is asked by the interviewer if he'd ever make a Castlevania with a female main character, to which he says, quote, "It's possible, I guess. Although I purposely left the Sonia Belmont character out of the official Castlevania chronology. Usually in vampire storyline motifs, females tend to be sacrificed. It's easier to come up with weak feminine characters. I'll think about it more in the future though. It's tough to fit a female hero into the early history of Castlevania. But as you move into the modern day, females can then more easily become a hero. So we lost Sonia due to this sentiment. But there would eventually be a proper female lead, who we'll get to next video. Lament of Innocence shows an average score of 79 out of 100, which makes sense to me. It's a decent action game with an interesting storyline, but leaves much to be desired. And though the exact numbers are hard to track down, it was marked as a commercial success, with claims of it reaching 940,000 units sold in North America and Europe combined. If there's anything I will give this game props for though, it's the killer soundtrack. Michiru Yamane returns once again, fusing a range of genres, but this time experiments with this dance music feel that gives certain areas that needed excitement. So Iga hit the ground running with 3 full Castlevania titles under his belt in the span of 1 year. The next project would surface in 2005, this time for Nintendo's newest handheld, the Nintendo DS, where Iga and the team would return to continue the story of Soma Cruz, feeling it would be a waste to only use him and the Tactical Soul system for only one game. Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow released in August 2005 in Japan and October 2005 for North America for the Nintendo DS. Iga and the team had stronger hardware capabilities to work with this time around, so they could now take sprite work straight out of Symphony of the Night to apply to this game. And you'll notice that the artwork has a pretty drastic change into this anime style. It was an intentional choice from Iga because he believed the Nintendo handheld audience was a younger demographic, and would have gravitated more to an anime art style versus Ayami Kojima's style of art. And because Aria of Sorrow underperformed from a sales standpoint, they wanted to switch things up aesthetically and also test if this would be a viable aesthetic for Castlevania games going forward. So we're back in the future in 2036 AD, 1 year after the events of Aria of Sorrow. So with Chaos defeated, the castle destroyed, Dracula permanently dead and reincarnated into a good person, where the heck could this story go from here? Well, Soma has been living in peace and at one point feels like he lost his powers. And while he and Mina are chatting, a woman named Celia Fortner teleports in and starts summoning monsters. Genyo Arikado shows up just in time to help Soma defend himself, and immediately he can start absorbing souls again. But it looks like this Celia woman wants to kill Soma. We learn that she's the head of another cult that wants to resurrect Dracula, which leads to Soma consulting with his military merchant friend Hammer to track down their base, which turns out to be a complete replica of Dracula's castle. Imagine hiking in the forests of Japan and all of a sudden you just happen upon a replica of Dracula's castle. Maybe one exists right now. Soma begins investigating the castle and runs into 2 familiar faces, Yoko Belnades and Julius motherfucking Belmont.
When my name come up, respect it.
The 2 of them are looking into this cult and warn Soma to be careful, as if he falls to darkness, Julius will decide to end him.
I ain't gonna say it no more.
But Yoko tells Soma that enemies in this castle will require a magic seal to be defeated, which is an excuse to use the second screen on the Nintendo DS. So in Dawn of Sorrow, to completely defeat bosses, the player will need to beat the boss, then draw the proper magic seal on the DS touchscreen to permanently kill it. Mess up and you'll have to weaken it again, and perform the magic seal until you get it right. So in this cult, along with Celia, are Dimitri and Dario, who are referred to by Celia as the Dark Lord's candidates, and they'll serve as the major antagonists. But Soma first bests Dimitri early on, dominating his soul before setting his sights on Dario. Arikado is also within the castle, annoyed that Soma threw himself into the situation, but he hands him a letter and talisman from Mina and then goes off to find Dario. But Soma will encounter Dario first, and to properly defeat him, you'll need to use a special soul to travel into a mirror in the room, revealing the flame demon Agony, who's been sealed within Dario's soul. So when Soma defeats that demon, Dario no longer has any powers to use and flees. But Celia has managed to get her hands on Mina, and ruthlessly kills her in front of Soma. And this rightfully sets him off, and he succumbs to his dark powers, embracing them fully to become the new Dark Lord. Julius, Yoko, and Arikado are left with no choice but to take him down, and this unlocks Julius mode. And during his search for Soma, Arikado reveals his true form. This should have been pretty obvious from blatant hints dropped in Aria of Sorrow, but Arikado has been Alucard this whole time.
What? No way!
Suppressing his vampiric powers, but with Soma growing so strong, he needs to go all out. Even though it's called Julius mode, the player will take control of Julius, Alucard, and Yoko, each possessing their own weapons and abilities. Alucard, a Belmont, and a Belnades, working together to defeat Dracula for the first time since Castlevania 3. In fact, this entire section of the game is a big love letter to Castlevania 3. But finally, the trio reaches Soma, who tosses a wine glass in proper Dracula fashion before the final battle begins. But he summons monsters in the midst of the fight to help him as well. With enough damage, he takes the form of Dracula's final form from Rondo of Blood, and together Julius, Alucard, and Yoko defeat Soma and escape to the cliffside as the castle crumbles one last time, and the game ends with a somber fade to black. The nightmare is over. Of course, this isn't the real ending of the game. It would be if Iga had the balls, but no. Soma is the true protagonist here, and what you should have done is be a good boyfriend and wear the talisman that Mina gifted you, because it calms him down enough to notice that it wasn't Mina that was actually killed, but a doppelganger. But in this moment, Dimitri's soul manages to escape Soma and enters the doppelganger. It was all according to plan. By being a part of Soma, Dimitri learned how to dominate souls and runs off into the castle to go collect as many as he can. So Soma and Alucard hunt him down, but Alucard can't fully use his powers because Dimitri sacrifices Celia to seal him. Do you think her name Celia is a play on the words Celia?
Coincidence? I think not!
I can't confirm this anywhere, but I know some genius named her that for this reason. So it's all up to Soma now, who has to take on Dimitri, who is unable to control all the demons he absorbed, warping him into an abomination named Menace. And Soma is forced to stop this creature, but even on defeating it, all the souls fall under his dominance, and he becomes overwhelmed, but manages to reject them and flee with Alucard. And as they stand outside the castle, the events of the game have Soma question him on what it means to be a Dark Lord, to which Alucard says, a being that is the opposite of God, which leads Soma to question if rejecting that title would just force another to pop in his place. Alucard reassures Soma that he's in charge of his own fate, and it's not his place to worry about being a Dark Lord if that's something his heart tells him he shouldn't be, and reminds him of the people that love him and are waiting for him. And the game closes with Soma and Mina reunited, and it ends with Alucard's last words, if the world needs a Dark Lord, it will emerge, even if it's not you, Soma. This is the end of the mainline Castlevania timeline, and with Soma Cruz, Dracula's story has come to a close. Dawn of Sorrow is looked back on as one of the best Metroidvania-style Castlevania games out there, and for the first time in a while, they didn't try to reinvent the wheel with this game. It's a proper sequel to Aria of Sorrow and a bookend to the lore after what would be almost 20 years of Castlevania up to this point. With Alucard's final line and all the timeline restrictions of Castlevania, Iga and the team were experimenting with ways to have more Castlevania games without relying on Dracula, and this would be one of those first tests. There was actually a sequel novel to this game called Akumajo Dracula Kabushi no Tsukioku, or Castlevania Lacrimosa of the Moon. And it was only released in Japan, but it covers the story of Curtis Lang, Julius Belmont's young apprentice and a vampire hunter, along with Michelle Dynasty, Kurt Lang's ally and descendant of Grant Dynasty, who go up against Ulrox, a rogue vampire who aims to conquer humanity. So while Dracula is gone, evil never rests. Soma does make a cameo in this, but it seems to be about a new generation that we never got to see in any future games. But Soma's story ended on a peak for the series, and it seems Iga had a proper grasp of making solid Castlevania games with Aria of Sorrow and Dawn of Sorrow. So next in Mentoktober, we approach Castlevania's strong presence on the Nintendo DS, and how this tipped into another area of strange experimentation before it came to a screeching halt for 11 years at the time of this video. But I want to send a huge thank you to all my YouTube members and patrons on Patreon, and welcome to my newest ones that joined. Joel Miller, Carl256, Brooke Marshall, Justin Wang, Bonnie, Carla D, The Cold One, The New Kid on the Block, Randy Whitmore, Anapan, Jess Dominguez, SQN is Good, Matozo, Brian Cisneros, Fat Goomba, The Clumsy Zeno, Gameka, Your Man's Graves, Plank Samakun, and Kenny Lauderdale. Thank you all for your support, and I will see you next time.